So
Tuesday, 3 o'clock.
Where else would you be?
I mean, exactly. I think we should, let the stragglers join. Might be having internet issues or enjoying the sun, having a cocktail or two.
Yeah. So the question for the day for you early birds is, what was the best film you ever saw advertised on a bus?
Yeah, I can't even think of a film I've seen advertised at a bus.
They don't get advertised on buses, it's very good.
But it must be quite expensive to advertise on a bus, or is it not? Is that the whole concept?
I don't know, but apparently the deal is, if it's hyped up enough, they know
Whether they
quite early doors if it's going to be
Right.
hyped, and if it's not, it ends up in time on the bus.
Is that to drum up hype?
Well, it's like last ditch effort. It's like, well, God, what are we going to do about this? Stick on the bus.
Right. But then what if it's just, there must be an exception of it. Been on a bus and it's good.
So I'm saying, well, you name me a good
So
film
in
you've
the
seen advertised on a bus.
questions chat,
If anyone,
if anyone's got any films that they saw on the side of a bus that are brilliant, feel free to let us know.
apparently Bond ones on a bus.
And
Oh, does that mean it's
It means
not going
it's
to be a
going
good
to be
one?
rubbish. Yeah, there's no point
Oh,
watching
wow.
it if you've seen it on a bus. Anyway.
But who decides that?
I don't know, it's just one of those immutable laws.
Is it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
someone's decided.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, if you watch the new Bond film and you disagree with us, you can catch us on all socials to tell us.
Or if you're a bus fan.
Or if you're a bus fan, that's obviously totally allowed. So I think we'll probably cut off the bus chat there. Apologies for anyone that joined and had to listen to that. But we are here today to talk about how to pick an agency. So yeah, if we can we'll run you through quickly how this is going to work. We're going to do some introductions, introduce you all to us and 3 Study Cube. And then we're going to chat a bit about our top tips on how to pick an agency, kind of like the inside scoop from our experience. And we're going to share that with you. And then we are going to get you introduced to our wonderful panel who are joining us today. We've got Rachel and Patrick, who are going to be giving you their personal experience and sharing some insights with you all. And there will be an opportunity for questions at the end, but please feel free to pop them in the chat channel as we go through, and we will make sure we leave some time at the end to get those answered for you. So introductions, over to you, Rich.
So I'm Rich, I'm the MD here at 3 Study Cube.
And I'm Gabby, and I head up commercial here at 3 Study Cube. For those of you that don't know much about 3 Study Cube, we are a software development agency. We are based in the south coast of England in sunny Bournemouth, and we're a mission-led organisation. So our mission is to change millions of lives for the better. And we do that by building tech for good, because technology is a super powerful tool that has the potential for huge reach and impact, but technology itself is agnostic. So the technology doesn't care if it's used for good or for bad. So we're very choosy in the clients that we work with. We work with clients that are aligned with our mission, that have the expertise, the knowledge, the audiences to work on projects where the technology can be really key in getting that impact and changing lives for the better. We've got lots of experience doing that. We've been working with our wonderful clients for the last 11 years. Clients including the World Resources Institute, the UN, the American Red Cross, and many, many more. But today we're going to talk a bit about how you can pick the perfect agency.
Absolutely. So, and that's quite an interesting point. So what we felt this was an opportunity to do is give you guys a bit of the inside track on what we as agencies, the sort of tools and techniques we use to when we're pitching for work to try and find the right client. So this is something that in the last 20 years of working in agencies, I've had a fair bit of experience of and in. So the idea really today is to give you a bit of the inside track. And as I said, it's kind of, this is the type of stuff that I would tell my friends, say, if I was down at the pub or at the golf course or at the nail bar.
I mean, obviously.
But this is the sort of things that I would be telling them to sort of prod and poke at an agency to really find out if they're a good fit for the type of work they're going to do. Primarily, I've worked in digital agencies, so a lot of this does have a technological slant to it, but there's You know, you can take a lot of these concepts and ideas and use them for any other agencies that you would be picking.
100%.
So I always say that there are 3 key things that you need to get out of your process when you're picking an agency. And these are there's a million different ways of doing this, but there are 3 questions that you will be asking when you go into any kind of process. And the first one is, can they do this? So that seems like a pretty obvious one.
Yeah,
you know?
it does.
Absolutely. You wouldn't necessarily get a decorator to do your plumbing, but it's really, really important that you know and that you feel confident that they can do the projects that you want them to do, or to do the work that you want them to do. Second, absolutely key one is, can I work with them?
Hugely important.
Yeah. So working with any agency is going to be it's a fairly tough task. If you could do it yourselves, you would be, but you're not. You're picking an expert to do that for you, and there's a lot of them out there. So you've got to find one that you work well with, because it can be very painful if you get that one wrong.
Absolutely. And just think about this as, you know, there's a time frame for the project to be started and delivered, but hopefully also like longer term relationships. So it is really, really vital that whoever you're choosing to work with, you can see a long-term future with them as well.
Absolutely. And that's where you will deliver a lot of value when you're working with people long term. And then that value term, the third one is, will they deliver value for me?
Yeah.
And value, we'll talk about it in a bit, but that's there's loads of different ways of talking about value, and it isn't just price, even though that feels
100%.
like the kind of obvious one that people go for. It's not the only one. It really, really isn't. So just to look at that first one, can they do this? There's kind of 4 key areas for this, and a really, really obvious one is case studies.
Yeah.
So everybody understands about case studies is a really obvious thing, right? You know, I want to know if these people can do this. Have they done it before? What I'm always really surprised at, though, is how people just take case studies at face value.
Yeah. Rather than interrogating them and asking questions.
Absolutely. So you will have, your project in mind, and your agencies of choice, however you've gone out to talk to them, will come back to you with a range of case studies that they see that will fit. And they'll sound fantastic, and they'll have all kinds of numbers attached to them, and it will read really well. But the devil's in the detail. So it's really, really important that you interrogate those case studies and don't just take them at face value. It's very easy to come up with numbers and to come up with stats and things like that. But it's really, what's interesting is when you sort of dig in and around those numbers and ask things like, how did they come up with them, and get them to evidence it a bit more. Case studies are a really key part to understanding if they can do the job at hand. It's not just about how they've responded to a particular brief, but actually, because that can be misleading, because it's very hard just to respond to an individual brief without interrogating it properly. But their case studies will show you what they've actually delivered in the real world. But it's really important to interrogate those.
I've seen some strong examples of this as well, in terms of being quite specific about the things you would like to see in the case studies, if it's like similar projects in terms of delivery, or if it's actually specific areas that you're looking to see. So I think, again, in that the power is in the planning. So if you really sit down and think, what do you want that agency to demonstrate? What evidence are you looking for? That can also be a really strong way of ensuring that you're getting the information that you want to make sure you can make the best decision. Absolutely.
And what's worth thinking about there as well is areas of the project or the activity that you're going to take on that you foresee as being a specific issue. So it might not actually be about that final delivery of it. It might be around their stakeholder management or something like that. So get them to evidence that through their case studies, because it's really, that is the proof of it. It's very easy to talk a good game in a room. Not that we would ever do that, but it's very easy to do that. The proof of it's in the pudding, though. So really understanding of that is kind of key. And then referrals is kind of coupled hand in hand with that. Referrals is a really, really interesting area. And from an agency point of view, we all have our favorite clients that we give to people as referrals. Obviously, we love all our clients.
All of our clients the same, wouldn't pick favorites.
but we do when it comes to referrals, because we know certain clients that will absolutely wax lyrical about the work we've done for them for whatever reason, because we've done a great job of it.
And also just, the other thing that we do is we know the ones that might be slightly more contactable and might get back for a reference. So there's also a lot of capacity involved in that.
So that's really, really good. But what I would always say to people is, and we've had this done to us, and it was actually a really good exercise to go through, is you pick who their referrals are. So a really interesting route we had is someone had looked at our different case studies that we had. They'd picked a couple out. They were happy that we kind of delivered ours, but they'd picked a couple out to investigate as well. And then they picked some clients that they chose that they wanted to speak to. And it was like, oh, okay. And as I said, luckily we've got wonderful relationships with all our clients. But that was I thought that was a really interesting way of kind of just navigating that bias part of it, because if you pick the person that you want to speak to, you're going to get a more honest answer. Now, when you're getting a more honest answer, you're going to get a more honest answer. So, and any working relationship can be difficult. So you've got to take it all with a bit of push and pull. But I thought that was a really great way of actually getting to under the skin of what a relationship would be like.
And I think, a point we probably didn't mention before that kind of encompasses all of this is like, do your research. Like, this is your opportunity to kind of be empowered, and this is your process that you're kind of driving as a client when you're speaking to different agencies. And this is all really part of that research process, understanding the things that you want with the case studies, the kind of evidence you want. And then, as Rich said, having slight control over the referrals just kind of does back that up a little bit and shows you've done your due diligence in advance.
Yeah, it was a really good exercise.
Yeah.
As I said, caught us on the hop a bit. We got there in the end. And then that third part of knowing if you're going to work with them is a really difficult thing. We're a software agency basically, so our projects are very, very technical. But having worked in marketing agencies and other types of agency like that as well in the digital world, we're often delivering technology products and complex kind of projects to clients. If, as a client, you don't have any of those skills in-house, then you've got to kind of accept that and understand it.
Yeah.
But what I would always say is try to get a bit of independent advice, whether it can be like a friend, but somebody that understands it. And I would personally say it's worth paying for.
Agreed.
To get somebody independent. They're not going to get the work, but they could help you be able to find the right partner. Because in the same way that if I go to a car mechanic's garage, I am completely at their mercy as to what they tell me is wrong with my car. I don't have the first idea, and they can tell me anything, and it can cost me whatever, and I don't know until I then, 2 weeks later, talk to my uncle or whoever who knows about cars, and he just laughs me out the room because I've just been ripped off. Like, that sort of thing can happen. And it's the same thing with the kind of technology where it's very easy to be kind of sold a pup if you don't know quite what you're talking about.
This is a really key one, and I would just say at this point, we've seen clients of all shapes and sizes doing this. So it's not just if you feel you're a smaller company that doesn't have capacity. We've seen really quite large organizations do exactly this, because I think it comes back to a point Rich made earlier. If you could do this work internally, you would probably do it. So there's sort of some areas that's not always the case. And sometimes we see clients that are really capable of kind of understanding the projects and coming up with really competent briefs and kind of being able to answer questions. But this is a really, really key one. And I think just having your ducks in a row before you go out really ensures you can benchmark agencies in the best possible way with kind of some knowledge and support around that.
Absolutely. So really important that you try to get as much information as you can to know, if these guys can actually do what it is that you need them to do. The second part of the process, really, that second question is, can I work with them?
Yeah.
And actually, this is as, if not more important than that first one, to be honest. In my experience, all of the successful relationships we've got with clients, and we've got clients that we've worked with for 11 years, actually, so pretty much since day dot. It's always because we have a really, really good, close cultural fit.
Great. Agreed. And I would just say, you know, if you do that first bit right in terms of that research and that kind of due diligence, and you know all of that good stuff, it can come down to this exact culture fit. Like that can be the difference. If you end up in a room with, you know, 3 agencies that can all deliver the job technically, then culture fit plays a massive, massive part.
So a shared value set is a kind of really important part of it. But what I would say with this particular piece of the shared value set is you also need to be very, very honest with yourself about what that value set is.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about it in terms of what you are and not necessarily what you want to be. Because what there is in the agency land, there's a lot of selling the dream and the new way of doing things, and we're going to change the entire world, which a lot of people do, and that's all wonderful. But there's no point in going for that kind of agency if the organization you work in just isn't like that.
Yeah.
So you may be, but you may be in an organization where some of your stakeholders perhaps are a bit more traditional.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. They've got where they are by having that traditional point of view, but you just need to be able to work with them, because we've had situations where we've been brought in to work with organizations, and they've wanted us to change the way they work and change their approach to how they do things. And that would be fine if you were getting us in to be management consultants to help them with, I mean, I wouldn't be the right person to do it, but, you know, getting an agency in to work on a project to change the way your organization works isn't necessarily the right idea for the success of the project. It doesn't make for a happy world for everybody, because it causes a load of friction and a load of tension, and, you know, stuff's hard enough without throwing that into the mix.
Yeah, completely agree.
And then you've got to think about stuff like, am I happy being challenged? It's a really kind of interesting one.
It's a really interesting one. I think a lot of the time clients will be like, we want to be challenged. We want like a technical partner, someone that's going to contribute a lot, particularly in our particular industry. But it is, are you ready for that? Are your stakeholders ready for that? You know, that's a big part of whether you can work well together, and there's that culture fit and that kind of collaborative effort.
That's it, because there'll be different agencies are going to offer you different levels of it. Some are going to be very obstinate and very passionate and very difficult about what they think is the right thing to do, and it's absolutely right to challenge people, and it's something that we choose to do all the time. But we've had situations where we've worked with clients and you can feel them in the room going, will you just fucking do what I've asked you to do? And you know, and that can be, if people don't want to be challenged, that's fine, there's no problem with that, and there are plenty of people in the world that will be happy to go along with that. So it's really, I guess what I'm kind of the banging the drum for here is really understand what your value set is and accept it and go with it. And there's nothing wrong with it, everyone works in loads of different ways, but it's really important that you do that to find the agency that will work with you as you are and not as the dream of something else you want to be.
It's really important. I think that's a really good point in terms of like, it's difficult to know who you want to work with if you don't know who you are and don't know what you want. So that's a really powerful thing that probably comes through with a lot of the points that we're going to highlight today.
Absolutely. And then the next bit about that cultural fit, we've sort of touched on it already, is the process of that you're going to go through to deliver your output. And what's kind of a really important thing I always think that I try to tell people is that the process isn't the product. People can get very excited about processes, and certainly in our industry there's always a new way of doing something, and you know, there's lots of that kind of new ways of thinking, and that's great to think about that. One of the things that I always talk about is I want our innovation to go into the product, not the way we do it. The way that you do things is a fairly well-trodden path that has, you know, we can show the success of the way we do it for our clients. So we want to focus all our innovation and creativity into the actual delivery rather than how we deliver things. So it's an interesting space, and new ways of working can be kind of sort of very seductive, if you like. I think if you're looking for something like that, again, that's going to depend on yourself as an organization and your value set. If that's something you're happy with and you're happy to try a load of new ways of working to see if you get a better result, that's absolutely fine. But if you are concentrating on getting that thing produced and delivered, you need to think about, okay, well, you know, how is that going to happen? Is that going to be a smooth journey for us?
Yeah.
Do we understand the processes enough to be able to kick them about and move them?
It's understanding the risks when it comes to new things. You know, there is a risk involved in that. So is that something that your organization is aware of, is ready for, is accepting of, or is it the heritage and the experience and the kind of safety, if you like, in more knowing that that organization can deliver through it? So it's just, again, knowing what you're willing to accept and knowing yourselves in terms of the journey and the process that fits best with you.
Particularly if you're new to something, if you're new to a way of delivery, you know, I would, you know, Picasso had to learn how to draw before he could invent Cubism. Is kind of important sort of parallel there. So it's good to stick with some tried and tested methods around that security, and people should be able to show their process as well.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, they will have metrics around it. They'll have ways that they understand how good they are at what they do. Whether that would be budget, deadline, quality, whatever that is, they should have some numbers around that.
I think that's really key. Like, challenging and interrogating what people say is also really powerful. And I think when we get kind of new business, particularly where we're having these conversations with clients, like, the earlier on you have those conversations, I think the stronger the relationship becomes as well. Like, transparency both ways, I think, is really, really important in that process. So do interrogate. We love it. Come at us with your questions.
And then I guess there's a question around, how do you understand these different things? What is the process that you go through to actually get to the agency? So there's lots of traditionally, I say traditionally, I guess I kind of mean pre-pandemic, we did a hell of a lot of, the typical way of winning new business was to go through a pitch. So you'd do a bit of chemistry stuff, and then you would do a pitch where it would be, it's a bit of a show and a ta-da, look at our stuff, and you know, all the jazz hands and things like that, which is great, and it's really important. And there's a really it's really great to get that kind of personal chemistry understanding in those meetings. But more often than not, that's not as available now. It's not quite the same doing it over Zoom. We've had some of those, but we also find now actually we're doing a lot more proposal stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of like thinking about that process, like upfront of how you want agencies to kind of go on that process, being really clear about the opportunities for asking questions, for example, before any of those proposals or pitches or chemistry, having opportunities to have a fluid conversation, in my experience, before the proposal is really, really useful just for both parties to really understand what it is that you're looking for, and then really being able to put the best foot forward for providing you with the information that you want.
And a really interesting question that we get asked quite a lot, which is in this area, is when we do chemistry meetings, quite often the clients will say, well, we want to meet the team that we're actually going to work with.
Yeah.
And I totally understand where that comes from. I 1000%, I get exactly what the meaning for is with that. But to be totally honest to the entire world right now, it is virtually impossible for me to tell you what team is going to be working on your particular project before it's been signed. It's just the way that schedules work and the way that agencies work. It's a fast-moving environment. So take our best guess, absolutely. There's obviously going to be no guarantees on it. But yeah, but I'm gonna just like counter that. But I think like totally ask, like I think ask to meet more of the team is like totally a cool thing. Like I think particularly when you're looking at culture fit, like understanding that it's not just the sales team that have got the mission and the vision and the kind of understanding, that it actually drips through to all the different teams, or certainly some of the teams, can be really, really powerful in terms of understanding the type of people that you're going to be working with and the type of agency. But I think, as Rich said, it's having like realistic expectations of what that might mean, that they might not be the people that are working on your project the other side, but it is a good way of understanding if that organization is a good fit for you. Absolutely. That's, you know, you've sort of said it better than I can, but it's just don't expect that you know, that absolutely, it may be slightly different, but it's good to meet as wide a variety of roles as you can, just to understand the type of mix of people that do work in an organization, because they are usually representative of the wider organisation. Might not be the exact people, but they're usually going to be pretty representative of it. Absolutely. I would have thought. So And then that the last piece is around are they going to be delivering me value? There's two key parts to that. So the first one is the B word.
The B word, budget.
So understanding from an agency point of view,
Yeah.
understanding a budget is absolutely key to giving a sensible response to any brief that comes in.
And we totally understand it. You know, there's this whole sense of I think there's two sides to it, not really understanding what's needed and wanting to base that on value of the proposition. Completely understand. But also there's this sense that like, if we know, we'll quote at that. And there's a sense that we might not be true. And I think the difficulty is, particularly with a lot of different areas, it is how long's a piece of string. I think having basically clear and transparent conversations around that upfront means we can make sure that both parties are aligned, and actually not wasting your time as a client if that's not something that we can deliver on. We can be really clear, really transparent, and I think for both parties that's a lot more effective from the start.
Absolutely. And again, from an agency's point of view, we can spend as much money as, but you can just do that. You can just keep going. It's not always the best thing to do. And when you understand the value, which is a different conversation, you can. So knowing where to pitch the offering is really important, and budget's a really good indicator. So obviously, ballparks are absolutely fine, and the ballparks can be pretty big. But any number is better than, the classic example is, well, you know, you tell me, or well, I'm waiting for your response to it. And then that's really difficult, because until you know a lot more about an organization and an organization's client base, and the next part, which is ROI, very difficult to really know exactly.
Agreed. And I just think, you know, knowing how you're going to benchmark agencies, I think I mentioned it earlier, but knowing how it's weighted, like how much is going to be on cost, how much is going to be on culture fit, whatever it is that you're looking to benchmark agencies, and being transparent in advance with those kind of benchmarkings also really means that people can put their best foot forward with things. And I think it is, if you share that transparency around budget, that really helps kind of make sure that you can put your best foot forward against those benchmarks. Whereas we've had, you know, examples where we don't know anything, and you kind of don't know if you're going to hit that 30% that they've put against kind of a big chunk of that benchmarking. You were kind of going in blind, so kind of puts you at a real disadvantage.
So genuinely, for us, and this isn't just a three-sided cube thing, I mean, just generally agencies, transparency with budgets is really, really important. Yeah. And if you pick an agency where the transparency is an issue, and you know, they don't offer you value, then they're just the wrong agency, and you'll know pretty quickly. So budget, honestly, is you know, is a really key one to getting you the best response and giving you the best understanding. And then the other key, the keyest bit, if you like, is for you to understand what your ROI is on it. And that isn't always pounds, shillings and pence. You know, it can be a very difficult thing to work out what the actual ROI is, but it's going to be possible, and you might get it wrong, but to have an idea is really, really helpful and really, really important. And again, you know, most agencies worth their salt will kind of try to push you for that, to understand what it is you're trying to get from your investment, because otherwise how do they know how they're delivering the value? So it could be mission based. As Gab said, we deal with a lot of the third sector, and you know, we're a very impact led organization, so quite a bit of our ROI is based around impact levels and what the difference that we're making to people's lives with a client. It's not necessarily that, obviously, for e-commerce, dead easy. Yeah. You know, how many widgets do I sell is that kind of thing. But whatever it is, there will always be an ROI that everybody thinks is okay. And it's worth having as good an understanding of that, even if you don't know the actual number, but certainly putting some time aside to think about that with your stakeholders to work out what good looks like is really important. You
know, and seeing if the agency understands that, pulls that out, if that's something that they quiz you on, I think is also a fair point in terms of seeing if that agency has got that in mind, which is going to be a really key part of knowing if this project with them is a success or not.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that kind of sort of, you know, sums up pretty, and we could really, this is a particular topic that we could talk for hours and hours about.
Which is why we have a panel as well.
Absolutely. The one thing I do always say, again, going back to that, if it was my mate down the pub thing, that I do always say to people with this kind of stuff, because you know, I do get asked about it a fair amount outside of my working life as well. And the kind of line I always come out to people is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It's very, very rare that somebody's come up with a new model for this type of business, which means that they can do the same as everybody else, but for a tenth of the price.
Yeah.
So it's really worth bearing that in mind, understanding it. And it, you know, if somebody's presenting something to you in that way, really interrogate it. Could be great, could be amazing, but in my experience, there's a lot of, it's very easy to be kind of misled.
Agreed, totally agree. And hopefully these top tips and the panel discussion in a minute will help you kind of be able to avoid that. So
when you're coming up with your process, the 3 questions you need to answer at the end of that process, and this is actually worth pulling out, and when you're down to your last 3 or whatever it is, they can do this because and give you reason. I can work with them because and give you reason, and they're delivering value because and give you reason. And if you have that, that's kind of the simplest template that I've had from one of these agencies experience, and it works really, really well. It's an easy thing to mark people on.
And kind of, as we say, like, this is our personal experience, and that's kind of why we wanted to invite some wonderful panelists of experts along, to basically make sure that we're giving a well-rounded picture from both client side and looking out wider from agency world. So it feels like a totally perfect moment to get our panel introduced to you. So I'm going to say welcome, Patrick, welcome, Rachel. And I'm going to come over to you guys now and ask for a little introduction about who you are, what you do, and kind of, I suppose, a little bit of your experience in this area. Rachel, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Rachel Murphy. I'm the CEO of Different. And we are we're an agency, and we design, build and run services normally in the public sector. So we do a lot of central government, and we do a lot of NHS in way of where we work. But again, similar to you guys, you know, tech for good sits at the heart of the work that we do at Different.
That's why we love what you guys do. Thank you so much for joining us. And Patrick, would you mind giving us a little introduction as well?
Of course, yeah, definitely. So I'm Patrick. I work for a very small management consultancy called Inuus. I've worked there now for about, 12 years, I think. And when I started, really, I was brought on to be a sort of digital unicorn. Can you design some proposals for us? And from there, it's kind of snowballed. I'm now director of digital products. And as part of that, I am tasked to look at who we can help to support the development of some of the ideas that either our consultants have, or indeed sometimes our clients come to us and need some digital support as well. So it's been very exciting to sort of immerse myself in this world, having not had a great deal of that in my early parts of my career, and yet now I've had the opportunity to do it a couple times. So I was laughing to myself. I was even taking notes from your guys' great presentation at the beginning. I'm like, oh, that's quite useful for me as well. But no, so yeah, so I have done this a couple times, and it's one of those things that is an interesting dance every time that I get involved with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And I think that's why, it's really important to us that we spoke about this. And I think it's great to see transparency across like the different experiences that we've got. And obviously, Rachel, I know you've got lots of experience in this area, as well as Patrick from that client side. You've kind of experienced it a few times and probably have some top tips yourself that we haven't even thought of. So I'm going to kick off by asking kind of the question that we've been chatting about, kind of back to you guys, really. So the question is, what are your top tips for picking the perfect agency? So might be that there's some similar ones, or you might have some insights that we can learn from as well, as Patrick said. So Rachel, with your experience working at Different and your background, what would be the kind of top tips you would say for picking an agency?
So I think a lot of similarities really in way of some of the stuff that you guys have spoken through. The I guess if you make the assumption that the technical, or in our case, the design capability is there, and you know, there's a pinch of salt with making that assumption, but it's all about the culture and it's all about the values, because you know, if I think about competitors of Different now, 9 out of 10 would be able to deliver the same services, but it's the what and the how. So it's, you know, it's how do you go through that journey? You know, is it a good learning experience? Did you truly kind of co-create this product or service? Did you have some fun while you were going along that process? Absolutely, you know, you would expect the ROI to be delivered, but I think it is for me, and you know, I've spent more time actually as a client than I have running an agency, and a lot of the time when I was trying to buy services, it was about the cultural fit, and it was, can they really understand what we're trying to achieve here? Can they work with my team? And you know, will we have some fun along the way? So they're the key things, but you know, they're probably the key things for me in life, not just in choosing an agency, but I hope that's useful.
No, I think that's really powerful. And I think that understanding is really key. You know, when I talk a lot to clients, you know, and I describe our team so similar to what you're just saying, you know, it's the passion you get, because everyone's here signed up for the same thing. Everyone joins Cube to make a difference. I think you get that really powerful kind of passion that comes with that, and making sure that that's a fit both sides, really. From like my point of view, when I'm trying to kind of find the right projects that fit with Cube, that's a big part, because you know, that's what they've agreed to do, and I'm in charge of bringing them projects which do that. So I think that's really powerful, that understanding. Are they going to care about the problem? Are they going to do the due diligence to make sure that they're not making assumptions around the project, the problem, that they're actually asking users, they're kind of pushing back, they're diving deeper, is all really powerful stuff. And I think that culture fit is in our experience, really, really key. And how you kind of make sure that culture fit is there is built around the process that you go through to kind of make sure you're benchmarking agencies and the kind of process you put them through. Patrick, is that your experience? Do you have any top tips? You mentioned that you learned a few things.
You know, I'm going to play devil's advocate and say that sometimes, actually, in my experience, sometimes just being able to get it done, to be able to do what needs to be done is enough. And that's not saying on the experiences I've had personally, just what I've observed with either some people I know in the industry or some previous projects that our clients have been running, that actually they just needed to sort of say outsource some user testing or a quick bit, like little bit of development, then they could do that effectively. But from the client side, I think what I learned and our companies in US learned through the whole process is getting clear about understanding the vision for the product or service from which that you want to get at the end helps you to understand the nature of the partnership. Because if you are going to go down the transactional route, if you are going to go down the, oh, we just need this done, then there's a lot of visionary and project management that you need to be confident you can do yourself. And that's actually where we slipped up in the past. We had a agency that we met through a friend, right? And they had an offshore development house. And there's, I think, again, a very interesting relationship between offshore and onshore development, which I can talk about. And you know, on the surface of it, it kind of looked really great, right? It was really cheap. They were very communicative. They were very good at what they did. It just felt that we, in the lack of maturity of our company and what we wanted to put together, needed a little bit more thought partnership about where we wanted to go, and to help fill in the gaps of what we didn't know about what needed to get there. And without that level of thought partnership, it just ended up into this, you know, kind of snowballing effect of, oh, we'll just fix this, we'll just fix this, we'll just fix this, without a large degree of vision looking forward. And eventually we had just, you know, hemorrhaged so much money into it. We went, you have to stop. And if you are going to partner with someone, which is what we're talking about here, you know, you have to partner in at the ground up. And from that level, that's where the culture stuff starts to come in. You know, do they understand what you're trying to achieve? Do they understand the values associated with it? Means that you're going well beyond, can you actually just, you know, code this little bit? And for us, it was, you know, it was a pretty big burn financially to kind of learn that the hard way. And now we're flying with it. So yeah, so I think that there is place for that transactional sort of style of agency, but you have to be clear that you can manage the rest of it, because that's not how products get done.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it really is being honest with yourself before you start engaging an agency, and knowing your limits and knowing where they're at is really, really important. And so many people do fall down on that. They're not, you know, they're just not honest with themselves, and potentially as well not honest. The other one we come up against is the understanding their internal stakeholder management as well, to know what's going to be expected from them can be quite problematic. So yeah, know yourself is a really
no, it's really interesting. It kind of feeds back to some of the stuff we were talking about when we were preparing this, so it's really cool that that's come out and seen across. So we talked a little bit in both of those answers about the importance of culture fit at whatever point in the process, and making sure that the agency you partner with has the right culture fit. So in your experience, how can you ensure that your mission aligns with your agency and the client? So what is the process you've both seen around how can you ensure, and your kind of top tips for that? Rachel, we talked a little bit about culture fit and the importance. What are your top tips for ensuring that it aligns?
I think a little bit back to what Richard said before. So if your business, you know, the people that work in your organization, you know, you know them pretty well. And I think by understanding yourselves and understanding the client, you'll also know and be true to yourself about whether it's a good fit. You know, we have stopped work at Different and said, you know, this is not what we'd understood the piece to be. We're not the right partner for you. And, you know, we will help you go and find the right partner. And we did that in the first 12 months with a very big client who was dangling a very big check. But we did it because it was important to us that we work with clients that have the right value, but also we were not the right partner, you know, because inherently, if you've got that clash, then, you know, it's on both sides of the table. Yeah. So I think that's about being true to yourself. It's about understanding your own business. And lots of organizations, you know, we work with the public sector and NHS. These are really hierarchical, very dysfunctional in some respects, but also hundreds of years old. So, you know, you can go in there with the largest ideas that you fancy, but the reality is they're not going to fly. So, you know, innovation in these organizations is not a cutting edge innovation. It's about, you know, turning the dial and driving some of that at a slightly slower pace. And I think it's, you know, that it just comes with experience, understanding your clients, understanding your prospects. But, you know, in my world, we don't pitch in the same way that you do in the private sector. You know, we have to bid through a framework. It's much more watered down, which is really hard from a digital agency perspective. But the, you know, the reality is we know domain knowledge so well. You know, we know prospects, we know the clients that we've worked with, we know, you know, what's going on from a government strategy perspective, spending review, and all of that plays into, you know, can we work with? But, you know, I would know off the top of my head the more progressive parts of central government and the NHS. And again, you know, we play in various different ponds, but we're very careful about who is resourced into those teams for exactly that reason.
That's really interesting. And I think like sticking to what you're good at, like, I think that's really powerful, like knowing where your limits are from both sides. I think we've talked a bit about it from like if you're looking for an agency, but I think actually from an agency perspective as well, it's kind of what we live by. Like, we have teams that are great at lots of different things, but we know we're good at the software development stuff. That's what we're good at. So we don't edge too far into the branding stuff or into the kind of marketing side, because that's not where our specialty lies. So I think, again, being transparent around that, make sure you're starting out a new partnership the best footing, kind of not over promising and under delivering. That's the thing,
don't do that.
Don't do that. That's never a good thing.
What we should be doing.
So I think that's really
it's quite interesting, the NHS example you give there, actually, because we did a very small piece with them, but it was a user research piece that we did for them, they were saying, we want an app to help our new recruits on board. So we went through this research piece where we sat with them and went through all this. And what became very clear very quickly was the last thing the NHS needed was another app and another content management system and something else to manage, because they're quite busy and they're quite understaffed. But what was quite obvious was the amount of abandonware that's in there, so software that isn't getting used anymore, where they'd bought into an agency that had obviously come in and talked about rapid, innovative development, which just is the wrong way of working with that particular organization. And you see the results, that there's a load of money wasted in the rest of it. So, the way that you guys deal with it, and that considered, slower, accepting what you're dealing with and being realistic is great. Now, rapid innovation and development is fine for a startup, brilliant. That's exactly what they need. But the NHS probably not so much, and both have their place in the world too.
And I think the interesting bit there is the NHS is 22,500 organisations, and we all assume it's one massive entity. And I made the same mistake when I landed. And so, you've got a fundamental challenge around sharing the data that's created there between those organizations, let alone being a patient wanting to access or, add to your data. So there's a level of complexity there that, doesn't exist in many places. But I'll be quiet. You've got me on my favorite subject here.
Yeah, I can feel that we could just do an NHS chat.
I feel like you two need to get a drink afterwards. And
we need a separate conversation.
Well, maybe a future Tech for Good talk, but I'm going to keep it moving. So, Patrick, what's your experience in ensuring that your missions align agency to client?
Well, actually, I just noticed, I think Jill Huston posted a question on the Q&A, which is exactly the point I was going to make in regards to this, which is that I know, with the standard now being around Zoom, that it seems a little bit ridiculous to say, but I don't think anything can replace meeting face-to-face when you are going to get into a partnership situation. And there's so much that goes into that, I've even thought this week, how can I really get under the skin of what I mean by that? Whether it's body language, whether it's sort of like the unspoken signifiers, you just can't replace the feeling state you get when you meet someone about whether you are on the same page. And I think that doesn't mean, from a micromanagement standpoint, it doesn't mean that you're getting up in the project team's business all the time. It just means that you have a human relationship at the primary touch points, which means that when you are working individually on your own stuff, you can feel that you could reach out and have that connection whenever you need. One of the things that benefited me when we met face to face, actually with you guys at Three Sided, is just that you can hear the kind of questions that are being asked to you, gives you a sense of whether there is a match of the cultures, because with some of the people we met, it was very salesy, right? It was very, as you said, this is so big and we can do all this for so cheap, but they weren't actually saying anything about us or what we wanted to do, right? And it was such a big giveaway. Whereas then when you meet someone who's the right fit, it's all the questions seem to be about what we would look to create as a partnership, and I think that's really the most important part of that. And just looking a little bit at some of the other notes in terms of ensuring that the missions align, I think that there is something you guys touched on in the beginning of the section, which is, can I talk to someone who's on the ground? Maybe not necessarily someone who will be on the project that's working with me, but it's very important to see, is the enthusiasm that you're seeing from the top, either from the management or the sales team, does that actually exist within the people who are going to be working on your project? Because if it does, then you can have confidence that means that the missions are actually aligned. Otherwise, what you're going to end up in, which we had in the past, is that it all sounds really good with it's on paper and you've got the sales guy in front of you, but then the actual developer you're talking to sounds like he hates his job and he hates his life and doesn't want to be there. It's not gonna it's just not gonna fly that way. So I think it's really, really important to meet face to face, sort of from people from different positions of the development organization.
I think that's really interesting, and that point around how much are they engaging with the brief, like what have you shared? I think that's always a good sign, like whether they're trying to get on a call to kind of like check some of the details or work some of that out. I mean, Rachel, very different what you guys do in terms of those frameworks. you know, how, I suppose, like, what's the difference for you in terms of that question in a post, which is Jill's question, in a post-pandemic world where we're having so much more Zooming? Like, what do you find? Would you recommend meeting in person to understand the culture better? Because I imagine from those frameworks, you can't do that. You have to kind of do the whole on paper first or computer.
You have to go through the first stage and the shortlisting. Yeah, that has to be done through the framework. But I would always encourage, you know, the same way as Patrick, get us in the room, because I think, you know, whilst we, I guess, are restricted to some respects about how we pitch and what we do, you can tell so much by being in the room. You know, I slightly different example, but I was at an awards thing last night with 250 people in the room, you know, and the energy is just electric. Okay, it's never that exciting when you're pitching, you know, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ooh. But, you know, maybe it is with you guys, but you know, that
seen my high kick.
I've obviously been missing out, mate. But in way of you know, in way of getting in the room, reading the body language, talking to the people, and really understanding what they're after. Yeah, there's no Zoom, Google Hangout, Teams session that comes close.
Yeah, agreed. And just understanding, like you've both said, how they work, like what their method is and how they get under the skin of a problem, I think comes out when you're in a room a lot easier to kind of start to do that. I think is a tendency, even in a pitch, you can like easily creep into starting the process because you're just so excited about the project that when you're in a room, you do tend to get that enthusiasm and certainly see where the areas they're going to focus on. And I think, as you say, that's a really strong way of finding, is this a good fit for us as agency partner? So last question for you before I open up for any more questions that have come through. We've already answered Jill, so that's great. How do you set yourself up for success? So kind of your big tip around starting that process and setting yourself up for success. Patrick, as someone that's been through the process, kind of two different ways, like what are your kind of top tips for setting yourself up for success?
I think at this point we talk about alignment of the methodologies and processes, which you guys again talked about at the beginning, is sort of like checking that the timelines match up to things like other stakeholder expectations, whether that's internal or external is massive, but also just like, you know, thinking about, you know, essentially, you know, you're going from being two separate systems to one team, right? And so the inputs and outputs from either one of those teams have to sync up in a way which means that everyone knows where things are, whether that's from a project management standpoint or what the touch points are. And after so I think there's you can't be too detail oriented when you're making sure that things like deliverables and timelines are working. And that isn't from a standpoint of, you know, making sure people are doing their thing. It's more from a standpoint of making sure everyone knows what needs to happen in the system in order to get a good output, and that obviously is facilitated by regular discussions and just regular conversation.
Brilliant. No, I think that's really valuable. And Rachel, from your perspective, how do you say, what would your top tip for setting yourself up for success be? That's a bit of a tongue twister.
So I think it's about defining the goal really at the outset, and getting that, you know, and solving that, but collaborating with stakeholders. And, you know, you're going to be trying things out, you're going to be experimenting, and you want to prototype those things and you want to learn from some of that pretty quickly. Is this going to fly, or are we going to take a slightly different course of action? And I think, you know, gathering feedback on that as you're going through is key. You know, you talked earlier about kind of engaging users. User research, possibly more prevalent in public sector, right? I don't know. It's been a while since I was in private, but, you know, there's a huge discipline around user research in a way that, you know, that will drive really defining, is that problem statement the right one? And then, you know, ultimately you can go back and you can check that against the success of the program of work.
Absolutely. And as you know, myself, I've sat client side before I hopped over to the dark side. And, you know, it's definitely with that user testing, that user feedback, it's so powerful from a client point of view, and also ensuring that you're spending your budget in the right areas. So you can really get quite excited about different things, and we see it kind of day in, day out, and that's great, all of that kind of ideation in a room, but actually putting it in front of users just ensures that all of the ideas that you and your partner are coming up with are exactly what those users want. And that's a really powerful way of not just ensuring, as we've said, that you're meeting those key measures of success, but also that you're spending your money in the right areas to achieve them. So I think that's a really key one to kind of remember when you're moving into the process.
Yeah, I think in terms of a client looking for an agency and getting the most success out of it, I think in terms of setting yourself up, you've got to do your homework on the people that you're picking.
100%.
Getting that shortlist is really kind of key, and actually putting the effort into doing that homework and thinking about what it is you want out of it. You know, it's very easy to just go and Google agency or whatever it is, and then look at a few websites and then pick the ones that you think are the nicest colors, and that unfortunately is not going to get you what you want. Really think hard about what it is that you need out of it. The days of it just being a bit of a beauty parade where you get to sit back and have people, it just doesn't work like that anymore. There's too many, it's a very, very saturated market out there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, and it's quite a low barrier to entry, to be honest. So, you know, picking people that can deliver real value for you is really important. Or we have a lot of people that come to us to rework stuff that's been done incorrectly by other people that have sold them on a dream, to be honest. So, and that's, you know, you sort of feel like making sure you've done your homework and understanding 100%. What it really is that you need out of it is really key.
And as Patrick said, it can be a lot more expensive if you don't do that.
Absolutely
so
is, because
there's, you know, a power in that. I think also one more thing to add before I do the final question is just to say, to really work that shortlist into a shortlist. Like, trust me, it's much more work for you if you've got a huge list of agencies that you're approaching. You know, do that research up front, know what your shortlist is, your 3-4 agencies that you're looking to compare, because it's a lot of work if you're trying to manage a lot, and that's kind of for you as well as kind of agencies, I would say as well. We've had another question come through. Woo! Tech people speak tech, and we speak the language of our field. Any recommendations about how to ensure visions are translated? I think that's a really powerful one. Rich, do you have any thoughts on that, as someone that's obviously, as you said, been in the industry a long time, showing his age?
I think that I would flip that slightly. That is an interesting criteria for helping to pick an agency, because if they can translate back to you what it is that your vision is in the language that you understand, then that will go a long way to understanding whether they've got what you're about and what you're doing. So if they can talk to you in a language that you understand, that's gonna, it's almost half the battle, actually. When you're looking at really tech focused projects, you know, it's yeah.
I think, again, if that's like a key criteria for you, looking at someone that can collaborate with you, understands those differences, and can kind of, like Rich said, has the ability to translate technical language into something that's understandable, is a really key thing. Patrick, is that your experience?
I was literally just nodding along, because exactly that's
I saw
exactly
you.
what I was going to say. No, because you know, in our experience, that's exactly the type of thing that showed us whether a agency was willing or was able to get us where we wanted to go. Because if they weren't able to do that translation from a vision to the technical needs, then they actually weren't going to be able to help us do what we needed. The only additional thing I would say, and I appreciate this might just be something that I found in my own skill set, is that sometimes, even if you are talking about tech, knocking up some kind of basic prototype, even if you sketch it out, just so that what you're then doing is helping to visualize, even in your ignorance, what you expect that sort of output to look like, just helps, I think, the conversation flow a little bit better about then supporting the technical side of it that would need to create that vision a reality. So that's just a tool that I found help. But yeah, I completely agree with you guys that it's like the first test for the agency, if they can even understand what you're trying to get out of it.
And I think also, like, don't be afraid to ask for explanations around it. You know, from our point of view, we work with clients, and this is probably the same with you, Rachel, I imagine. They talk a lot in acronyms. We don't know, we're not in the field, just ask. And it's the same with technology. So I think, like, also just be really transparent with each other. Is that your experience, Rachel?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, the
Yeah.
NHS is an acronym, so we'll start at the top. But I guess for us, we may be slightly different, pardon the pun, because we have a large kind of team from a user-centered design perspective. So service designers sit as part of our team. And therefore, you know, the service designer would be working to build out that service, which would absolutely be from a layman's perspective, and not just the digital service, you know, both the digital technology side, but also where there are any kind of interventions of the physical nature. So I suspect, again, we approach that slightly differently.
Yeah.
But you know, I think the days of coders sitting in a darkened room on their TOD, unable to communicate, are, well, I mean, I've met some recently, but in the main, we've moved on.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think agencies have had to move on. You know, certainly with our team, it's a big thing we pride ourselves on, is that I know I can put any of our team in front of a client and they can speak in a way that the client understands. So, you know, I think it's a really strong point to be looking at. If that's something you're fearing, I think that's like one of the benchmarking that you're looking for. You know, that's going to be a really key part for your organization, enjoying the process and kind of having that transparency. So my thing would be kind of like, use that as a way of kind of finding the right agency, and hopefully that helps answer the question. So, conscious of time, I think we've done the questions. I really think we could have chit-chatted about this all day, and there's probably drinks needed to carry on this conversation with the panelists outside of this. But thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much, Rachel and Patrick, for joining us and sharing those insights with us. We really appreciate that. So just one last thing to kind of touch base on.
Yeah, so we don't have a virtual Tech for Good talk next month.
Drum roll.
We've actually on the 14th of October got our Ignite event. So Ignite is an initiative that we run here that is aimed at helping to promote the circular economy. So we've got a special event in real life.
In real life, guys.
Actual real life. At the Conduit Club in Covent Garden, and it's all about bridging the gap. So that is looking at there is an intention action gap between people that want to behave sustainably but actually don't when it comes to the point of action. So
yeah, we've got some really amazing speakers. We've got some great opportunities to network and connect. So what I would say is we'll be sending out some details afterwards on this and all the ways you can sign up and join us for that. But do also feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn or any other ways that you fancy reaching out to us to find out more. And hopefully you can join us then. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.